Do you have any lens adapting tips you can share?
I sure do. I've got lots of tips. I've organized them into the following 4 groups. The first group is tips on getting ready to adapt lenses. My second group is tips on how to buy lenses for adapting. My third group is the finer points of adapting lenses. And finally, we're going to look at a bunch of tips on using and maintaining lenses. Okay, let's talk about getting yourself ready to adapt lenses. Before you jump in and start adapting your first lens, especially if you're doing one of the more advanced methods, you need to properly prepare yourself and your work area. Now, here's 4 tips that I've got for you on getting ready to adapt your first lenses. Number 1, at the end of this section, I list a number of free YouTube videos that I'd like you to consider checking out before you start doing advanced lens adapting techniques. These YouTube videos have helped me a lot, and I think if you go through them and you watch them carefully, you're going to learn a lot of things that go well beyond what we cover in this course, and it really helps to understand the workings of a lens and how to take one apart and how to put it back together. Number 2, get yourself some basic lens repair tools. Now, the first tool that I'd get would be a small Phillips head screwdriver, and you use this for tightening the lens mounts on your camera lenses and on your camera mounts. Now, any tool that you use should be magnetized, and you can't buy a magnetized tool, so how do you magnetize them? Well, get yourself a magnet. This one is from an old stereo speaker, and you just rub the tip of your tool against that magnet. That's all it takes. And when I'm not using it, I have this hanging from the magnet, so it keeps its magnetism all the time. Another part of a basic kit is a magnifier and a flashlight. You use this for inspecting lenses for damage. Now, what I prefer over a flashlight is a 6 or 8 loop headset like this. And then when I'm inspecting a lens, I can leave the headset on and I've got a free hand to hold the lens, and then I just move the flashlight around at the bottom of the lens. Another element that I consider to be key to any good lens adapting kit is a spanner wrench. Now, if we want to look at some more advanced tools beyond spanner wrench, magnifier, flashlight, and screwdriver, I would recommend you get a helicoid grease, a tweezers, a suction device like this, a digital calipers, and some of these rubber devices for removing lens elements. That's what I would consider to be a good advanced kit. Third thing I'd like you to consider doing to get yourself ready is the first few times you adapt a lens, make a video of you adapting that lens. That way, if you're having trouble reassembling it, you can just play the video back. Also, if you've got a real complex adaptation to do, make sure you video record it. And finally, practice. Practice adapting lenses. Take apart and reassemble cheap lenses. You can get cheap lenses from thrift stores, eBay, or if you're a member of a photo blog, just in the wanted section of the photo blog or on the website, let the other members know that you're looking for a lens to use for parts and that you'll pay for shipping. Okay, now let's talk about some tips for buying used lenses for adapting. I've been buying used lenses for over 25 years. In that time, I counted up that I've bought and sold over 600 used lenses. I've learned a lot through this experience of buying and selling, and I've learned that there are 3 types of sellers when it comes to selling used lenses. The first type I call clueless. These are sellers who really don't know anything about a lens. They're not evil. They're not trying to rip you off. They just simply don't know very much about lenses. The second type I call used car salesmen. These are folks who like selling a used car. All they care about is making a profit. All they care about is selling that lens for the highest price they can get. And they will exaggerate the quality or sometimes even downright lie about the defects that lens has. And then the third type, of course, are your honest sellers. These are people who do their very best to inspect the lens and describe it with honesty. Now, when you're buying lenses, chances are you're not going to know which one of the 3 groups the seller falls into. So I suggest that you treat all sellers the same and follow 3 steps. 3 steps that I think are going to help you make sure you get a good lens for a good price. The first step is to ask a lot of questions about that lens. Read the description in the ad, and then send messages and emails to the seller, getting in writing all of the details on the characteristics of that particular lens. Get it in writing, because if the lens isn't as described, you have it in writing, and that will help you to get your money back. The second step in buying a good lens is to find out what the returns policy is. What is the returns policy? Larger sellers such as Roberts Camera, Use Photo Pro, B&H in New York, and Adorama in New York, they have a 14-day return policy with no questions asked. These folks have really terrific returns policies. If you buy on eBay through PayPal, you will be afforded what they call the Buyer's Protection Plan, which also offers you pretty good protection and a really good returns policy. But if you buy your lens through a photography website or a photography blog, you're not going to have any returns policy. Also, if you buy on Craigslist, I have a recent experience on Craigslist where I bought a couple of Leica R lenses from a guy in a parking lot. I couldn't inspect them very well, and then when I got home, I found out there was all kind of fungus inside both of the lenses, which I couldn't tell by inspecting them in the parking lot. So make sure you have a really good returns policy. And thirdly, do a thorough inspection and test on that lens as soon as you get it. And if it's not as described, put the return policy into effect and send it back and get your money back. So how do you inspect a lens? How do I inspect a lens? Well, the first thing I do is I shake it. And sometimes you'll find that the front element, rear element, usually the front element is loose, and you can tell by shaking it. Other times, actually, I found some loose screws or other metallic components inside of the lens, and you can often tell by shaking it. Next thing I do is, when I inspect a lens, is I focus it a few times. It should be smooth and throughout the entire range, no stops or rough spots. Then open and close the aperture to make sure it opens and closes properly, and look at the aperture to see if there's any oil on the blades. If there are oil on the blades, that's a no-go, because it can cause your blades in time to stick, especially in cold climates. Next thing I look for is I look through the lens hold it up next to something white, like a white piece of paper, and see if it's yellowed. If it is yellowed, it's not a good thing, but it's usually not that big a deal, because what I do with the yellowed lens is I take my little IKEA LED Navling light, and it costs $15 from IKEA, and I put this light over the lens, and then I put some aluminum foil on the bottom to reflect the light back up through the top, and I just leave that IKEA LED light on the lens for a day or two. Now, I've actually had 3 lenses that I've done this to. These 3 lenses right here. And all 3 of them were yellow, 2 of them to a lesser extent, and those 2 took me, a day or 2 to get the yellow out with this technique. And the one lens had really heavy yellowing, and that one took me about 3 days. So yellowing, it's not a good thing, but it's often fairly easily and cheaply correctable. The final thing I do when inspecting a lens is I put on my headset, get out my flashlight, and shine a flashlight through the lens. This is really the only way to inspect the internal glass elements. And I move the flashlight around, I inspect it from the rear, flip it over, inspect it from the front, and what I'm looking for is dust, scratches, fungus, fog, haze, mold, and separation. Now, if there's dust inside, usually it's no big deal. If there are scratches on the front or rear of the lens, again, usually it doesn't affect the image quality. If you do want to test to see if the dust or scratches affects the lens quality, take some pictures of a clear sky and set your aperture to the smallest aperture you can. In this particular lens's case, it's f32. Take some pictures of a clear sky and then look at them on your computer screen. And if you can't see the dust or scratches at the smallest aperture, you're not going to see them at any other aperture. But if you're inspecting your lens with the flashlight and you see any fungus, fog, haze, mold, or separation, walk away from that lens, return it, because unless you're an expert, a lot of these characteristics, fungus, fog, haze, mold, and separation, will probably get worse to the point where it's going to adversely affect your images. So if you have fungus, haze, fog, mold, or separation, send the lens back right away.